the most common theme that came out of the 13 roundtables when we, listened, it didn't matter what subject we were talking about. It always come back to feeling, and it was something that every single person spoke about, from some of the top consultants in the world to people that have just worked in the industry for a couple of years. The one common theme that came back was, how does a bar make you feel? And that was really the best way to judge. But to judge feeling is a very difficult thing to do.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode. Well, welcome back everybody for another episode of Decoding Cocktails. I am Chris LeBeau. Thanks as always for being here. Today I've got three guests on to talk about an initiative they're working on. We have Hannah Sharman-Cox and Siobhan Payne. They are the co-founders of London's Cocktail Week, and Dan Dove, who runs an agency called Global Bartending, which puts on many events and also manages a number of notable bartenders out there. But they've come together to launch something called the Pinnacle Guide. And this is designed to be something along the lines of the Michelin Guide, which is used historically to rate restaurants. Their purpose statement for Pinnacle Guide is to create an authentic, reliable, and trusted recognition system that elevates the bar industry, underpinned by fair and visible processes. So in a lot of competitions out there, you're often competing against others for the title of best bar, best bartender, best hotel bar, etc. But in the Michelin Guide, historically, you're not competing against other restaurants per se. You're competing against the standards of what a 1, 2, or 3-star restaurant is. And that's exactly how the Pinnacle Guide is designed to be. You don't win best bar in the world, you win a pin, depending on how you're falling in. The other thing that's interesting is at times there are, in a lot of the other competitions, the question is, how do you catch the attention of the judges? And at least one of the conversations is that you have a lot of budget for PR. But the first phase in Pinnacle is actually to nominate yourself. Now, it is more than, my name, my restaurant, and here's our website. It's going to be a pretty lengthy process, but it's designed to also help you kind of audit your own standards, but also give them an idea of who is applying. But the real appeal of this, in a way, is if you look at a list of best bars, and it's not to say you can't find exceptions, but you're going to see them in cities like, city-states like Singapore or Mexico City, Barcelona, New York, London, etc. Tends to be these bigger cities. And as someone coming from a smaller town, I find the idea that you can nominate yourself honestly very interesting. Once you have reviewed yourself, then you are anonymously reviewed if you've kind of advanced the second stage. And there are 6 modules by which you're evaluated. That is the look and feel, operations, your relationship with the community, staff, the front of house, and your drinks program. And each carries various amounts of weight, whether that's in stage 1 or stage 2. After kind of putting this together, they then embarked on a noble and daunting tour of talking and listening to many, many people to make sure that as they roll this out, how do they get enough buy-in from the drinks industry that people are excited for it to be here? And like with anything, nothing is perfect. And so I've heard, kind of like various thoughts on how do you think about what exists as the current award systems versus this one? But I think it's very exciting to look at one that kind of enables smaller market bars to hopefully get better attention. And second, the amount of effort that they have put in to really reach out and learn, it feels to me like their heart is really in the right place. And so I'm excited to see where it goes. If you want to learn more, check them out at thepinnacleguide.com or on the old Instagrams at thepinnacleguide. Again, I think this is exciting, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Hannah, Siobhan, and Dan. So Dan, Hannah, and Shaban, first, thank you for taking a couple minutes to talk today. I'm honestly very intrigued about what you guys are working on here.
Thank you so much for inviting us, Chris. We're delighted to get the chance to talk about it in a little bit more detail.
I'm glad we can. So, I've tried to do my homework on this, but I'm curious, knowing that all of you guys have some drinks industry experience, was there a thing that I don't remember hearing per se was there, and obviously we can leave any names out of it if any names exist, but was there a moment that you suddenly felt like you wanted to, as we were joking right before we started to record, to boil the ocean in terms of what we need is another awards platform, and I'm all for it, but did you feel like you were seeing too many of the same names? Did you feel slighted at a point in time? What was kind of the catalyst that at least got this idea rolling in the first place?
I think it wasn't necessarily any failings of what exists already. We just saw that there was a space for a system that resembled Michelin, as in 1, 2, and 3 stars. We're not calling them stars, we're going to call them pins. So there was that side of it. We felt that the bar industry deserved that sort of very easy to understand by consumers rating system for bars. And secondly, we felt that there were some gaps to be filled with regards to bars being represented on the lists, and ensuring that bars that maybe don't get a look in do on this new platform.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So, again, as I was saying earlier, in terms of my keen interest for this, being in a second kind of tier market at this point in time, while it's not impossible, it does feel rare that I see a bar, a hotel, et cetera, cited for a cocktail program from Oklahoma City or, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or my town of St. Louis. Is there a way in which you feel like at this point in time, having studied the awards market so much now, is there a way in which is there a reason why these current award platforms don't seem to be reaching cities like mine as much? Because I've heard you guys kind of refer to capital cities a lot when you're talking. So how do you think about this platform in terms of second tier markets like my own?
I think one of the main call outs that us three made at the beginning of this process was that Pinnacle Guide, when launched into a country, needs to cover country and not a capital city. And currently we see lots of award bodies awarding bars in capital cities because the main way that they're judged are generally through travel of industry drink experts. And by default, they normally travel through capital cities or through key cities of each country. And so there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just a very, very complex job to judge outside of capital cities from that perspective. And so it was something that we really looked at. We are super, super keen on ensuring that when we launch into a new market, and when we say a market like the US as a whole, is that what we will not be doing is just focusing on New York, but hopefully making our way down to you, Chris, near Chicago, and making sure that bars of very, very good standard and level get the representation that they deserve that they may have not done previously.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
One of the key differences that we started with kind of a bit of a blank slate, but really where we got to is that there is space for judges that aren't simply just kind of the who's who list. And we've all done quite a lot of work in the consumer sphere, and we all felt like with the right training, we could ensure that all sorts of people could come in and verify this last stage, which is kind of how it will end up working. There's a submission process from the bars first, and then our anonymous reviewers will go in and verify that information, and of course add in how they felt and how the hospitality felt, and of course add in all those layers. But once you're in a position that you've opened it up, at every stage of this we were like, hang on, this is possible, we can do this. It's just obviously it's a little bit more time and effort on our part, setting it up and recruiting and training those people. But yeah, that's why we're sure that we can reward anybody who applies, because we'll find somebody who will go in and verify.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's a key point that Hannah said, is that bars have to apply to get one of these. So with the Pinnacle Guide, we're giving as many people as possible the opportunity to be recognised, but you have to put yourself forward to be recognised. So actually what we hope it means is that we'll be finding bars that weren't necessarily on our radar, because if a bar feels that they are good enough to apply, then we will consider their application. And it doesn't matter where they are. They could be in the middle of nowhere in New Zealand, and we will consider their application. And if they pass the application process, which is quite in depth, so we're looking at quite a lot more than just what's in front of the bar. We're looking at their processes behind the bar, how they treat their staff, how they treat the environment, obviously, as well as their approach to drinks and hospitality. But if they pass that criteria, then we'll find someone that will be able to go to that bar and anonymously review the bar. So yeah, it's quite exciting. I think we'll be discovering bars that, you know, the industry aren't aware of, that are doing really, really good work, which is exciting.
I do think it is, you know, even when you think about capital cities or bigger cities in terms of, you know, as we've seen, like right now, what is it? At least on some of the other lists or places of note right now, you might see like a lot of things popular in Barcelona or others. You know, Mexico City has obviously had its massive ascent, you know, in certain categories right now. And I think generally as you cross cultures, you're going to see different approaches to drinks, hospitality, etc. And I think it's very interesting to think about as you kind of get very granular on a country, to think like, oh, like, yeah, this is what cocktail programs look like, perhaps in traditional enclaves like New York, you know, DC, etc. But what happens when suddenly you're in Cleveland or Wichita? I think it's fascinating to think about what we can unlock in terms of understanding the different ways that these are brought to fruition. And I love that there is the self-application process. I feel like, again, mentioning it to a bar owner friend of mine, that immediately made it more appealing to him, because I think at times it can feel like a question of who can generate the most smoke, can oftentimes be who ends up at least nominated on these lists. And for smaller programs that don't have or don't wish to employ, you know, someone to kind of raise that flag for them, I could probably feel very daunting to ever feel like they're being recognized. I could say here in our city, for example, we don't have, and I've heard this from a couple of people, we have what I think is, you know, a pretty notable food scene, but we don't necessarily have a dedicated formal drinks critic. We have formal food critics, but when the food critics turn their lens on to cocktails, they're not necessarily applying the same lens. And so it's hard for them to feel like they can even get the right local notoriety to at least push to a broader body at that point in time.
And what we hope is that the submission questions that we've put forward, they're people from the trade speaking to other people in the trade, right? We're not asking them questions that they might not know the answer to or inappropriate. We're asking questions based on our collective 60, 70 years, whatever our collective amount of time is now in drinks, based on that and based on like actually running and operating a commercially successful venue. There's no place in our submission process to get any more points if you've got a big PR agency. There's no space in our submission program to gain any points if you run takeover programs. That's cool if you do it and tell us about it, because this is the whole point of this, is it's a bar's chance to tell us all the stuff that's good about them, right? That's the point of the submission process, but there's no points available for that. So what we're really hoping is that this enormously opens up the possibility of recognition in a way that hasn't been done before. And that, as Shiv said at the beginning, that's not in any way a criticism to what currently happens, but it's for our three brains, it's exciting to unpick something and see if there's a different way of doing it.
I thought, and again, having watched a couple of your guys' talks, like I could certainly see you excited and also ready to pull your hair out at times. You know, I think there's 12 modules. Is that correct? That you?
Oh no, there's 13 now, because
13, perfect.
It's so annoying because there was 12 and it was lovely. It looked lovely on the website, perfect. And then because one of our commitments as part of the Pinnacle Guide is full transparency, taking on feedback. And one of the pieces of feedback was that we needed a little bit more conversation around staff wellbeing. So we added another roundtable halfway through the programme. So there's 13. It's not quite as perfect, but it was important to us to take that feedback on board. So we had to leave aside our perfectionism and include it.
And then from the 13 roundtables, that distilled down into 6 modules. So the 6 modules are what that form the submission process.
Very good.
So that,
got it.
yeah. So the 13, the baker's dozen became the 6.
Mm-hmm.
And the 6 are 3 probably are a little bit more obvious. So front of house, drinks program, interior styles. And then on top of that, there's a piece on community, there's a piece on your staff, and there's a piece on your ops. But kind of, again, ops based on taking care of people rather than just like, you know, not just numbers. We're not into that. It's more about, have you been thoughtful about where your stockroom is in comparison to your bar? Is someone climbing underground, going downstairs, bumping their head every time? Just, you know, those kind of questions, because part of our responsibility is asking the questions actually as part of this submission process. That's the bit that's kind of, as we just got increasingly excited about this, is that every time we ask a good question, somebody's going to go away and think about that. And if they weren't doing it before, save your progress, fix it, come back, continue filling out the form. So it's like, there's such space to allow people to improve. You know, nobody's going to have a completely perfect application. Nobody, as proven by the 13 roundtables. Nothing's perfect, but there's space within it and kind of and prompts to ensure that people are thinking and hopefully thinking in a kind way.
I like the fact that, you know, that can the application be thoughtful enough that it helps someone rethink that? Because as a job that can be very demanding, and a lot of work is, of course, in this world, but that you can accept some ergonomic failures or, you know, staffing problems, but like, so in the process of, hey, I'm really proud of these drinks, hopefully that can spur you to think like, oh, what would make this an even better program overall? So it's kind of nice to think that hopefully the application process could be a little bit, perhaps frustrating for them in terms of like, damn, I really wanted to submit, but also therapeutic in terms of getting to a better program overall at this point in time.
Exactly right. And that's what was so lovely about those roundtables, is that we brought in people from all over the world. Some people we knew before, some people we didn't know actually, and we'd researched them and really felt like they would add a layer into this. And so all those collective voices and thoughts have come into then writing these 6 modules. So it's a real collaboration piece. A job like this could never just sit with 3 people to be like, this is how we judge the equivalent to Michelin. It just could never happen. So it's
especially not 3 people based in the same city.
Yeah,
that was
right.
key.
Right. Yeah, no, I thought it was cool on your roundtables to see people convened from so many places with hopefully the input that could help you kind of really push things forward at that point in time. One of the things I remember hearing about, speaking of Michelin and kind of using them as perhaps a guiding star, so to speak. So, with all the, clearly there's a lot of labor required in the reviewing of applications, but then, sending people to these markets is certainly a whole other thing. I remember hearing from someone that, Michelin is something that has been practically impractical because it's a long times it was a money loser for that. It was a loss leader for the tire company in a way. How do you think about, because I don't know if I've actually seen this. So in terms of funding this, getting people to market, what are the things that kind of help? How do you make a program like this itself sustainable for you 3 and whatever other requisite team is required?
So first of all, we're aiming to use reviewers that are local to the market. So we're we're not going to be sending people around the world, which I think not only saves money, but it saves the environment a little bit as well. Initially, we're also just covering expenses of the reviewers, so the drinks expenses of the reviewers, which we think is still the best job in the world. Obviously, down the line, it would be really nice if we can actually pay people for their time as well. But considering that the reviewers will just need to maybe do 2 reviews a year or maybe 3 a year, we'll be just covering that. With regards to the kind of the business side of things, I guess, we're going to be looking at what insights we can gather over time through this process. And essentially what we'd like to achieve down the line is that, as well as being a body that rewards and recognises the world's best bars, we can also be a body that creates insights around what is happening in these best bars. And that will be something that we believe that the whole industry can really benefit from, and elevate their own, that elevate the industry as a whole through the knowledge of what's happening in bars, not just the bars that are recognised at the moment, but around the world in the smaller cities that are delivering excellence. So that is kind of how it will sustain itself as a company, I suppose, through these insights.
And the second part of funding will also be that we are currently in some fantastic conversations with some very large luxury consumer brands that will look to partner and sponsor us throughout the coming years. And so that will be something that we knew from the beginning, really, but we made sure that we listened to everybody over the last 2 years to ensure fairness. And something that we've still stuck to this day is that we're ensuring that we're not going to be funded by drink brands, and we want to make sure that any major partners or sponsors for the Pinnacle Guide moving forward will come from luxury consumer outside of the drinks industry.
Both of those sound like very smart things. And yeah, I mean, knowing a number of restaurant and bar owners, I mean, the places that they pick up insights from, they're often so busy, even if they want them, they don't know where to look. And the idea that you could, hey, we've received 5,000 applications over this, and here's what we've gleaned from it, is certainly an interesting insight to be able to turn around and provide to them. So with all the listening and just the timeline of process you guys have created, it's just miraculous. Are there the parts of the process that have been surprisingly more straightforward, or what are the parts, other than actually just launching this thing and getting it out there, what are the parts that still you think are going to be the hardest to evaluate? How are you without triggering too much therapy needed right here? How are you guys feeling about this?
It's been straightforward. As a caveat, as an answer to your question.
It would have been straightforward, but I think we care so much about getting it right. We've not brushed anything under the carpet.
Yeah.
So even things that, it would be much easier to just use exactly the same model as Michelin, for example, and just send people around and go in and be like, yeah, this is a nice drink, this is nice lighting, the staff is nice, the end. But I think because we care so much about changing the status quo, like Hannah said, none of it's been completely straightforward, but it's been really good for us, I think.
And
it's
to that point,
fascinating to not have we're all very fortunate that we have other businesses and we're kept very busy other places. But what that's meant is that we haven't had to rush this. We're not on any timeline because we don't have this answering to a drinks brand, we're just answering to ourselves. And so what that's meant is that if something's needed an extra week, an extra 2 weeks, an extra month, just breathe and get it right, rather than force things through and make quick decisions. We're like, no, let's sit on that for one more week. Let's reconvene on Tuesday. Let's just breathe on it. And so, yeah, there have been things that are difficult, and we've had to do a lot of learning and growing as we've gone along too. We definitely weren't coming at this with a perfect solution. That was why we chose to do this in the way, to involve the trade in as much as anybody wanted to be involved in from the very beginning. But yeah, the space that we've given ourselves has meant that we've got to all the places just without the kind of the grief, I think, that can come sometimes when you're on somebody else's schedule.
I think what's been interesting is that it's almost starting each new phase. The start has always been a little bit daunting because we're creating a concept of measuring excellence that it doesn't currently exist. So, for example, when we said, right, we're going to have this consultancy phase and we're going to ask the trade what they think, we're going to get everyone's feedback and ensure that this is a system created by the community for the community. When we made that pledge, it was almost quite easy to make the pledge, but then creating the plan of like, right, okay, how does that actually, like, we can talk about that to the cows come home, but actually how does that manifest in real life? Like, what does that mean? So then that bit was quite hard. That felt like the uphill bit of like working out how. Then once we worked out how, then we just did it, and it was just loads of really interesting conversations with people, fascinating, clever, unbelievably successful people for months. It was brilliant. But then once we'd finished that section, it was like, right, okay, we've said we're going to take all this feedback on board. Now we've said that we're going to create a system that rewards bars and all these different levels and all these different measures. Then the thought of like, right, how are we going to do that? But then once we decided how, with the 6 modules, with the application form, with the review, with the anonymous reviewers, then it was kind of, then we were like on the process. So I suppose now with applications imminently opening, they might actually already be open by now. I think the next thing is like, right, okay, now we're actually reviewing bars. We're reviewing their submission, and then we're going to be sending reviewers out. So it's kind of almost the thought of things that for me is the hardest bit.
But once you've taken the back, us three, we've known each other, well, me specifically to the girls, but we've known each other for over 15 years. We've worked alongside each other in a very similar capacity within the drinks industry. We've worked in marketing, we've worked in building brands, we've worked in event management, and so we've got many things in common. But the one thing we do have in common is that we're so detail driven with everything we do, everything that sometimes it doesn't benefit us too much because we overanalyze everything, which is a good thing, I think, in the long term for the Pinnacle Guide, right? Because it means that the base, the branding, the website development that's going on in the background at the moment to ensure that everything that Hannah and Siobhan have just mentioned actually comes to fruition and functions once it goes live. The detail that we've taken to ensure that everyone's feedback has gone into place and it functionally works, as Siobhan just said. So I think people say it's always in the detail, right? We truly believe it is, but in the building of something of this size, we have to do it at the right pace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I remember hearing that resonated as well is that while maybe Michelin is, again, kind of the example, has continued to evolve, perhaps, that traditionally it would have been rewarding more white tablecloth formal service, and absolutely something to be said for that. But at the same time, I mean, some of the places I feel most at home are pretty gritty. And you can even, I remember even recently, and there's plenty of examples, but, recently in New Orleans at this point in time, we went to a bar called Barrel Proof, and I would not describe that bar as very sanitary, but it was a great place to hang out at. And the drinks that came across, I remember I was there with a couple of bartenders, obviously. And the minute we saw the bartender, just the way he picked up the tins, we were like, okay, yeah, this is going to be good. And so, yeah, I think how do you capture the most elegant of hotel bars and something like Barrel Proof in New Orleans in the same, pass? And maybe they're not all in the same category, but that we all deserve a chance at recognition, because what we're doing is excellence in our own way. And so I think it certainly is what makes this very much an ocean boiling affair for you guys. And so I appreciate the diversity of things you're trying to evaluate at this point in time.
Yeah, we felt it was really important that the drinks industry as a whole was recognized, because we're not just white tablecloths and we're not just hotel bars. And so the way, again, back to your other question of like, did that feel daunting? Yeah, it definitely did. But once we cracked it, all of it comes down to the submission process, right? So when a bar chooses to put themselves forward for a pin, we'll ask them the questions, tell us about your bar, right? And so all you need to be to get a pin is the very best version of the kind of bar that you are. And that, not for a moment are we saying you need theme bars, right? But if you're a hotel bar, there will be certain things that you have access to, whether that's a nice somebody in the toilets passing you a hand towel, or whether that's complimentary first drink as you sit down because the budget's there, right? But if you're a beach bar in the best beach bar in the world, you're not going to have those two things potentially. And so everything that we're doing is measuring against your own a bar's own concept. Mm-hmm. So what it allows is, if you're a tiki bar, be the best tiki bar. If you're, all of it is like with the questions, and the questions you can see, they're all publicly online, the questions that we're going to ask. They're saying within your constraints, within what's available to you, like explain. So that then we are in a position that we can reward a 3-pin beach bar in the same way that we can have a 3-pin hotel bar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in exactly that way. We're not measuring bars against each other. We're not comparing at all. The only bar that we're comparing each venue to is their own idea of what it should be. And we believe that through that kind of value, we're going to be representing the diversity of the different places in the drinks industry that makes the industry so amazing. That's why we love it. That's why we love bars, because you'll never get this same experience twice. So yeah, but it took a bit of time to get to that, didn't it? We were how do
it was really interesting as well, Chris, what you just said. When you walked into a bar in New Orleans and you saw your bartender pick up the tins, and probably the lighting was right and the smell was right, and you got served in a speedy time, and all of those bits that just make it right. It was the most common theme that came out of the 13 roundtables when we listened. It didn't matter what subject we were talking about. It always come back to feeling, and it was something that every single person spoke about, from some of the top consultants in the world to people that have just worked in the industry for a couple of years. The one common theme that came back was, how does a bar make you feel? And that was really the best way to judge. But to judge feeling is a very difficult thing to do. And so it's something that we've taken into huge priority as we work through our 100 questions as you go to enter in and self-submit, is that those questions should hopefully help answer how you're made to feel as a guest walking into your bar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I loved and this has come up a couple of times recently, but I noticed in one of your things, like, does the experience begin when you're making the reservation? How do you think about that? And yeah, I think that clearly what you're hitting on is, the term mise en place gets thrown around all the time. Very important to the operation and execution of a bar. But, and I always make the caveat on the podcast, I've got a French last name. I don't speak French, but the term mise en scène, is like, the whole idea of the feeling of a place. And I think that it is, yes, it's much more subjective and hard to put your hands around, but it when it's there. And in terms of like, you go to a place and you get a great executed cocktail, but there's just kind of like, it's kind of soulless, right? Or you go to a place and the drink's fine, but the vibe is just, it's right. And to know that those can both be okay. And so I like, to your point of, I was more recently in my own town at a bar that would be a very high-end establishment. And I looked around and a lot of people there were having a good time. And I was like, oh, this isn't my scene. And to realize that that's okay. That can be their scene at the same time. Knowing that if we're talking about beach bars and hotels at the same time, there are different categories. And to your point with other award systems that out there, this isn't necessarily better. It's just taking a different angle. But, and so I don't know if it could be personnel or if there's a way to answer this, but are there categories that you feel like have been most overlooked so far at this point in time? Are there things that you feel you're working to bring a more objective process to evaluating this industry, but are there things that haven't gotten a shake yet at times with other programs at all?
I'm not sure there's a specific category of bars if you were to break them down, but I feel that because the majority of bars that are normally judged are generally capital cities, not always, but the model's generally that way, that they're more city-led bars. And now the city-led bars could be underground dive bars all the way to a five-star hotel bar. But generally what they don't offer, or a city doesn't offer, are bars that have land and more of a rural environment to be able to grow produce on site, etc. So I think by us uncovering bars that are not city driven may give very different drink programs that sit outside because of the countryside or the rural element of that bar, which I can definitely see in the UK for sure instantly, and we can see in most countries around the world where I think this may happen. But yeah, I guess that's from my end. I don't know, Hannah, Siobhan, if there's any other categories that maybe we feel like have been.
I mean, often you're just the we're not looking for one. I think that's the biggest difference, right? Because if you're looking for best new menu, best new opening, there's only space for one, but there's many. And we've always said there's no cap on pins. If you're good, and you get one. If we'd be delighted if 10 people got one, we'd be delighted if 100 people got one, and so on and so on. But there's no, someone said the other day, what's your definition of success for this? And it's like, it's certainly not a number to that, right? That's not one of the measures for us, the number of pins. And so therefore there's lots of venues that are doing great work, but because they're not new, because they've not put out a really high concept menu, because for all the reasons that the categories currently often sit, then they get overlooked. So I think that's going to be interesting, maybe for more established venues and that's not, I don't mean like previously awarded venues. I truly mean like years established that wouldn't necessarily fit into some of the awards some of the ways that you can be rewarded currently. So we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's helpful. And one of the things I did want to ask about too, knowing that we've all seen, bars, restaurants, just businesses in our community, people be awarded something, best award by this magazine you've never heard of, and they're probably good people, but hey, like my mom thinks my business is great. I know you've talked about that over time, much like we would see Michelin as like, oh my gosh, like you got 2 stars, like that's pretty serious stuff. So what are the things that I know it was one of the talking points with some of the partners? What are the ways you begin to kind of build brand with consumers so that when they see this place has a pin or 2 pins, that they go, oh my gosh, like this is. So what are the steps you take to make sure that people revere this over time?
The first step for us, we know, is patience. It's like practice patience, because like, look, and Dan mentioned this earlier, we've all been in this industry a long time. Obviously, Hannah and I work on the founders of London Cocktail Week, which is now in its 14th year. And so we know how long it takes to get to places. Dan's got global bartending, which again, he's put, actually, Dan, that your success in global bartending has grown pretty quickly, but we've all been in the industry for a really long time, and we know that it's going to take time for it to become part of the vernacular, that exactly like you said, and that's our dream, that people are like, oh wow, this must be serious. But beyond the patience, I suppose it's just ensuring that our brand, the Pinnacle Guide, represents that kind of luxury value that is going to underpin the excellence of the venues that we're representing, and ensuring that every decision that we make means that the Pinnacle Guide brand is epitomizing that message of excellence, I think.
We think timing is everything as well. I think we, post, we won't mention it, but we'll very quickly post-COVID, I think there was a trigger that happened, and it was happening pre anyway, but the moment of people at home making cocktails, for sure, we've seen the rise in over the last 5 years globally. We saw that rise in chefs bringing amazing books and TV programs to the mass 10, 15 years ago. We saw the rise in people cooking dishes from chefs and from platforms that exist over the last decade. And it's something that, the girls have done amazingly well from a consumer perspective with London Cocktail Week, creating, the world's largest cocktail festival. Is something that we do from Global Bartending. We make sure that we're trying to push some of the world's best drink experts into the consumer realm. But that can't just come from entities such as Global Bartending or from London Cocktail Week or the Pinnacle Guide, it has to be a joint effort where at a macro level, we're looking at people at home wanting to hear about great drinking experiences, that they want to make and learn to make these great drinks at home for their friends. And so when we choose to take this to the mass, whether that's through the website, through the power of the internet, whether that's through TV, whether that's through PR, we know that that's connecting correctly with our consumers at home. And we think that now in 2023 is the beginning of a very, very steep journey that will take.
I know we're getting close to time, and so we can certainly make sure we include anything else you guys want. But I will say, and I appreciate that I was last night a little later than I expected, but I was out with a couple of friends who were visiting in town, and we were just having a conversation in general. My good friend I was with and his wife, they he's been a cook for a long time, but just in general, the pull of people from a culinary perspective over the past, especially in this country that for a long time had no discernible great cuisine of its own that's, emerging. We're seeing cocktails are obviously following in that. And people are hungry for this now in a way like they weren't before. And I like the idea that there is more of this, a we than us, but knowing, of course, that this is a slog, that these things take time. But I feel like more objective advice is useful because it is interesting to me that you can go into so many bars now globally, and I imagine particularly in London, but you can go in and drop, 15, 20, $20 plus, how many, pounds, whatever, and get a drink that's fine. And I think that it's hard for the consumer at times to discern what's going to be a great experience. And sometimes you just got to experience it for yourself, but trying to help establish a better marker for what excellence looks like, I think is great, because there are many ways you can dress a drink up and charge a great price, but the overall experience be a letdown. And every bar is going to have its up days and down days, but I like this idea of trying to, deploy a more objective system over evaluating these things.
And the beauty is in what you just said as well, Chris, because some of the world's best cocktails are only $20. And you may have to spend over $300 to go and have one of the world's best dinners. And so what we are trying to do is open up, we speak about our families all the time, but I speak for my family as well, like my mum had, before I take her to these amazing bars, would never be a person that would generally on a Saturday night pop and go and have a drink at a certain top bar in London or when she travels, because the expectation almost is that it's almost sometimes it might be too expensive or just too far out of your comfort zone to go to these places. But hopefully the Pinnacle Guide will allow people like my mum and other people that haven't been able to do that to understand, to go, you know what, I could spend $10 more for the night for a drink and go and have a world-class cocktail in a world-class bar.
Yeah. So first thing, obviously, I think when in doubt, a restaurant, bar owner should apply or figure out what the application process is all about to evaluate if they're ready for this. Is there anything else we haven't covered? We'll be sure to link, of course, to your guys' website and social media and whatnot. But is there anything else that you want people to know before we wrap things up today?
It's worth remembering that, yes, we definitely would like bars to apply, and you've got to be in it to win it, as the saying goes. But people can also apply to become anonymous reviewers. That is open to everybody. You don't have to be a drinks professional to do so. You can be a drinks professional. So yeah, we're going to be looking for reviewers around the world to go in and check out these bars and be part of our process.
On behalf of, as one person from a non-capital city, so to speak, I would like to thank you guys for this insane venture you've undertaken, because I like to think that people in markets like mine will feel like a pleasant level of recognition is like a thing that feels more achievable for them now, if they are, of course, worthy for such a thing. So thank you again for taking the time to talk today. I appreciate it.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. The show notes for today's episode are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. If you'd like to keep up with what we're working on, there are two great ways to do so. One, our short weekly newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, which you can sign up for at decodingcocktails.com/newsletter. Or give us a follow on Instagram at Decoding Cocktails. If you think this podcast is great stuff, we'd love it if you'd subscribe or, of course, share an episode with a friend. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon, and happy cocktailing.